Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Tes Amud Aleph, starting with Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis, 11 lines from the bottom. Our Mishnah states that the Korban Pesach is brought after the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. In fact, all of the other Korbanos are brought before the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. In other words, there are no Nidavim and Davos that can be brought after the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. So the two Korbanos of the Tamid Shel Shachar and the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, really have all of the other Korbanos in between the two of them. In other words, there is no Korbanos that are brought before the Tamid Shel Shachar, and there are no Korbanos that are brought after the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, with the exception of the Korban Psachim. The Gemara now brings the sources for this. Says the Gemara, Tonu Rabbanan bring the following brisa. Minayin shelo yeh davar koidem letamid shel shachar. From where do we know, what is the source that we do not bring a korban before the Tamid Shel Shachar? Talmud loymar, it states in the pasuk, ve'orach aleh ha'oila. It says in regards to the morning, it says that the Kohen, he arranged the fire for the oila in the morning. Ma Talmud loymar. Ma Talmuda. What is therefore the reference that we understand that's referring to the Korban Tamid Shel Boiker? Maybe it's a different oila. Or marove ha oila. Oila Rishona. With the hey hayediyah, ha oila is referring to the oila, the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, which was the oila. So that's the first Korban oila to be brought. Uminai shein davar karev achar Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim. Okay, so now that we established that there's nothing brought before the Tamid Shel Shachar, where do we know that there's nothing brought after the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim? Talmud loymar v'hikter aleo chelvei hashlomim, and he burned upon it the chelvei, the fats of the shlomim. Ma Talmudai. From where do we understand then that we can derive that nothing was brought after the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim? Omar Abaye aleho shlomim v'loy al chaver shlomim. That pasuk that we just brought, v'hikti aleh chelvei shlomim, is a reference that's talking about what's brought in the morning, the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar, and it says on there that he burnt on that Korban Tamid Shel Shachar. Upon that, meaning afterwards, the chelvei hashlomim. From there we learn out that only there is korbanos that are brought afterwards. But in its chaverta, the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, nothing is brought afterwards. Ask the Gemara, Maskif LaRava, Rava challenges. Maybe if you're going to learn this pasuk, is telling me there's nothing brought after because it says v'hikter aleho chelvei hashlomim only by the boiker, but not gabi achar Bein Ha'arboim. Maybe it's only the shlomim that you're not bringing afterwards. Ha-oilois nakriv. But other korbanos, like a korban oil, you would bring. Elom Rava, and therefore Rava says, you learn it from somewhere else. It states in this pasuk, it says, v'hikter aleh chelvei hashlomim. From there we learn hashlomim, because the word hashlomim makes a drasha aleha hashlem. Kol korbanos kulon. On it, you're mashlim. All of the korbanos kulon, that's a reference to the Korban Tamid Shel Shachar. You're mashlim everything else afterwards. Whereby, when it comes to the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, you do not bring anything afterwards. Now the Gemara brings a brisa in regard to then teaching us that the Korban Tamid precedes the Pesach. In other words, the Korban Pesach is after the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim, and we're going to find out the source with this brisa. Tonu Rabbanan, Tamid koidem la Pesach. First is the Tamid, and then there's the Pesach. Pesach koidem la Ketores, whereby the Pesach then precedes the Ketores. Ketores koidem la Neiros. So therefore, the order is the Korban Tamid, the Korban Pesach, and then the Ketores and the Neiros. On top of Nun Tes Amud Aleph. The Brisa explains, Yu'uchar davar shene'emar boy. We will then make later the matter that it's stated in the pasuk Ba'erev ubein harboyim. There's two references to the Korban Pesach. L'davar shelo nemar bo ba'erev ela bein harboyim bevad. To that which it only states bein harboyim, referring to the Korban Tamid. So we see that the fact that the Torah mentions two different references to the Korban Tamid, to the Korban Pesach, ba'erev and bein ha'arboyim, that means it's later than that which is only mentioning bein harboyim, the Korban Tamid. Ihochi asked the Gemara if that's going to be the way you understand that the Korban Pesach is later than Korban Tamid, then Ketaris v'neiros nami nikdemu la Pesach. Then the Korban Pesach should be after the Ketaris and the Neiros. Why? Because for the same reason. Yu'uchar davar hashenemar boi ba'erev ubein ha'arboim ledavar sheloi nebar bo ela bein ha'arboim bilvad. You'll make later that which it says ba'erev and bein ha'arboim, namely the Korban Pesach, to which that it just says bein ha'arboim, namely the Neiros. Shiny and the Ketaris. The Gemara says no. Shiny hasam demiate rachmana oisoi. In conjunction with the Neiros and the Ketaris, it says the word oisoi as a miut, to exclude it from being before the Korban Pesach. The Tanya, me'erev ad boiker, the Brisa says, tein lo midasat shel dolekes me'erev ad boiker. We learn out from the words me'erev ad boiker in regards to the menorah, that it has to be then put enough fuel, enough oil, to last until the morning from Erev ad Boiker. Dover Acher, the pasuk goes on to tell me, Ein lecha avodah shekishera me'erev ad Boiker, ela zu bilvad. It teaches me that Erev ad Boiker means that this last avodah is the Neiros, and therefore there's no other avodah afterwards, only that which is preceding it. My taima, what's the reason? On Makro, the pasuk says, Yaroich oisoi Aharon ubonov me'erev ad boiker. So here we're learning out from the word oisoi. Oisoi me'erev ad boiker vein dover acher me'erev ad boiker. Only this, namely the Neiros and the Ketaris, will be going to be me'erev ad boiker, the Neiros specifically, and therefore that's going to then be the last of the avodah, the last thing that is done for the day. And that is referring to the Neiros, as it says, oisoi, specifically that. The iskish ketaris leneros, and we make a hekesh to ketaris and Neiros because it's written over there that the Neiros are burnt as a reference to the ketaris, yaktereno. V'tanyo, now the Gemara brings a brayso, kikushon, with our same question, Tamid, koidem leketaris, the Korban Tamid precedes the ketaris. Ketaris kodemes leneros, which precedes the Neiros. The Neiros kodemes lePesach, and the Neiros is before the Pesach. So here, this brisa has it in the other order. Here it has it as a Korban Tamid. It has it as the Ketaris, the Neiros, and then the Pesach. So that means the Pesach is after the Ketaris and the Neiros. And explains the brisa, Yu'uchar davar shenemar boi ba'erev bein ha'arboim, l'davar shelo ne'bar boi elo bein ha'arboim bilvad. Let that which it states ba'erev and bein ha'arboim, namely the Korban Pesach, to be after that which it states only bein ha'arboim, namely the Ketaris and the Neiros. V'hoksiv oisoi. It's written oisoi, which we learned before that this is an exclusion. And if it's an exclusion, therefore the Pesach or Pesach should be after the Neiros and Ketaris. So why does this brisa state that the Pesach comes after the Neiros and Ketaris? Says the Gemara. We learned before that the Oisoi teaches me that the Neiros and the Ketaris comes after the Pesach. So why does this brisa say that the Pesach comes after the Neiros and the Ketaris? Because Hai Oisoi mi boile lemeute avodet shebifnim. Because according to this brisa, when it says oisoi, it is an exclusion, but it doesn't exclude the Korban Pesach. It comes to exclude the avodah shebifnim, which is namely the Ketaris. That means the Neiros is going to then come, and it's going to then come after the Ketaris. Umaynihu Ketaris. I might have thought to say, since it says in the Pasuk that Aaron will then light the Neiros, Bein Harboim, Yakter, he'll light it. And therefore, I'll think that that's referring to already after. That will be referring to, that means that the Ketores is going to then have to be lit. I have to then light the Neiros and then the Ketores. There, the word oisoy, you know that the Ketores is lit, is burnt, and then the Neiros is lit. So why does it say ben arbaim yakterena? This is how you have to read the pasuk. Rachmana beidon de madlekes Neiros, at the time that you're lighting the Neiros, tehei mekatra Ketores, the Ketores shall already have been burned. So therefore, the Oisoy is coming to teaching that the Neiros is last. It comes to exclude the Ketores which is before it, which is the Avodah Bifnim. The Gemara now brings another brayso in regards to the order. Now we said before, nothing, there's no korban that's brought before the Tamid Shel Shachar, and that's true on the outer Mizbeach, on the copper Mizbeach. But there is something that's brought on the inner Mizbeach, the golden Mizbeach, and that's the Ketores. And that's what the Bryce says over here. Shenemar says, ba-boiker, every morning. The Yukdom Ketores, Dover Shenemar boi ba-boiker, Dichsiv, v'hiktir alav Aaron Ketores, Samim, ba-boiker. L'dover Shalo Nemar bo ela boiker echad. The Ketores which states, boiker, it's brought every morning. That should then precede that which it says only once boiker, namely the korban tamid shel shachar. And therefore, the Ketores does precede the korban tamid shel shachar. And there's nothing that holds back, meaning there's nothing that comes after the korban tamid shel ben arboim. Ele Ketores v'neiros uPesach. Other than the Ketores, the Neiros and the Pesach, we learned before, umechusar kippurim be'erev Pesach, as well as now the Brisa lists the one who is mechusar kippurim, namely the mitzara or a zav, somebody who needs to then still bring a korban, and he is before Pesach. Here we're talking about somebody who forgot to bring his korban, and he needs to bring his korban. He forgot to bring the korban before the korban tamid shel ben ha'arboim. So he also can bring it after the korban tamid shel ben arbaim, which will then enable him to eat the korban pesach on the tesvav at night. Shetoivel shenis va'eichel es pischol la'erev, that he is toivel a second time, even though he was toivel on the 7th day. But now on the 8th day, when he brings his korban, he has to bring toivel again, and he eats the korban pesach at night. So that's another situation where one would bring a korban after the tamid shel ben harboim. Rabbi Yishmael ben Noisha, Rabbi Yechim ben Noi Broiko Omer, Af mechusar kippurim b'shar yemois hashana shetoivel v'oicha bekachim la'erev. He says even a mechusar kippurim, like a mitzara, in the rest of the year can also have a situation where he will bring his korban after the korban tamid shel ben harboim. Namely, if let's say he had then was noidev a korban shlomim, and he did not yet bring his korban that he has to bring on the 8th day to make him fully tahor, which will then enable him to eat from a korban. For him to eat from the korban shlomim that night, which is a mitzvah aseh, so he has to then bring his own korban to then give him a complete kapara on the 8th day. So if he forgot to do that before the korban tamid shel ben harboim, he can also bring, according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Broika, his korban after the korban tamid shel ben harboim. The Gemara now asks, Bishlama letanakamo. That's very well according to the Tanakamo, who's talking about where you're able to then, if you forgot to bring the korban, the mitzara who forgot to bring his korban before the tamid shel ben harboim, he can bring it afterwards so that he can be enabled to eat the korban pesach that night. So then Yavo asay the Pesach sheyesh boy kares v'yidcha asay the hashlama shein bakars. Then we understand why the mitzvah asay of eating the korban Pesach at night, which is a mitzvah aseh that carries with it a chiyuv kares is stronger, and therefore it is goiver over the mitzvah aseh, saying that there's no other korban being brought after the korban tamishel ben harboyim. So we understand that very well. But ask the Gemara, Ella Rabbi Shmuel ben Noisha Rabbi Yochanan ben Broiko, my ulmei dehai aseh mehai aseh. Why is this aseh of eating the shlomim at night, which is a regular aseh, greater, stronger, that would push away the aseh of hashleim, of complete all the korbanos, that you shouldn't have any more korbanos after the korban tamishel ben harboyim? Omar Ravina. Omar Rav Chisda, Ravina says the name of Chisda, because Hocha bechatas ha'oif askinon shein la mizbeach eladoma. Here we're talking about the chatas that the mitzara has to bring him a kapara. That korban chatas is an oif we're talking about. In other words, we're talking about somebody who is poor, and he brought an oif, and that oif that he's bringing doesn't have any of the oif itself on the mizbeach, only the dam. So therefore, it's not bringing a korban on the mizbeach after the korban tamishel ben arboim. Rav Papa Omar, Rav Papa has a different answer. Afilu teima bechatas beima. Even it's going to be a chatas with a beima. How can you bring that on the mizbeach after the korban tamishel ben harboim? Ma'alo umelino beroish shel mizbeach. He brings it up and he puts it and leaves it overnight on the roish of the mizbeach, where it's permissible. Lina is not a problem. And then only the next morning he'll burn it. So therefore we get out of the problem that he's burning a korban after the korban tamishel ben arboim. Ask the Gemara, but the mitzara still has to bring another korban. Va'ika ha'asham. He has to bring a korban asham. So what's he going to do about that? Bishlam Rav Papa hainu the mailin law. We just answered that he puts on the roish of the mizbeach. That would be also a suitable answer for the asham. Ella asked the Gemara, the Rav Chisda, my ikal lemain. What are you going to say according to Rav Chisda, who said that you're only bringing an oif chatos, whereby it's only the dam that goes on the mizbeach? Amrei, they'll say shekarav ashamot, that he already brought the asham. The asham was already brought before, so there's not a problem. Frek the Gemara, but still the ha'ika oila, still he has to bring a korban oila. In addition to the chatos, the mitzvah has to bring an asham and an oila. So therefore, how can you bring an oila after the korban tamishel ben harboim? Why should that push away? This asay should be no stronger than the asay of hashlim, of not having any other korbanos after the korban tamishel ben harboim. If you say he doesn't need to bring the korban oila, it's not ma'akev. V'atanya, behold, it states in the Brayso there, Shmuel ben Yochanan ben Broika, he himself said, the same way that he needs to get a full kapara only with the chatas and the asham, he also needs to bring the korban oila. If you tell me the answer we brought before, as we did by the asham, he already brought the korban oila, that can't be. Who says that you can bring a korban oila before the chatos? The oila always comes after the chatos. Ve'atanya, behold, it says in the Brayso, v'hikriv es asher lechatos rishoina. It says in the pasuk that he was makriv, that was a chatos rishoina. The chatos was rishon. Ma Talmud learn, what's it coming to teach me? Im nulame shetei kodemis la'oila. If it's going to tell me that the chatas come before the oila, harek var nemar, it already states in the next pasuk, ves hasheni yaseh oila kamishpat. It says that the oila is second. So why does it say over here that the chatas is rishon? Ela zebona av, to teach me that everywhere when you have a chatas and the oila, that the chatas comes first and the oila comes second. Lekol chatois sheyu koid mois lekol ha'oilos habois imahen. That the chatas always precedes the oila. Even in a situation we have a chatas oif that will still precede a oila behema. So therefore we're left with the question once again, how is it that when it comes to the korban oila, how did he go ahead and push that away? How can the essay of the korban oila go ahead and push away the essay of the hashlim, of not having any other korbanos after the korban tamishel ben arboim? Omar Rava says, here's an exception. Shiny oilas mitzara by the oil of the mitzvah, there's an exception that over here we do say that indeed the oil can precede the chatos. The Rachmana Omar, on top of Nun Testament Beis, Vehela hakoyin es ha'oila. The pasuk says that the kohen should bring up the carbon oila. That's talking about the mitzvah, by the oil of mitzvah. And here we learn out shehelekvar, that he already brought up the oila, and therefore we see that by the mitzvah the oila can precede. It already preceded the chatos.